Oh, we've got this character here. Just got a basic fighting stance, and he's holding a lightsaber, and he has to throw it from one hand whoop, into the other. So we've got this quick little animation here. Just throw and then catch. Isn't it wonderful? I spent so much time on this. Literally 5 minutes before the stream. I needed some animation. Whoop, there we go. Oh, we've got our animation. And it's working decently. So we get the throw, whoop, catch, but the object isn't moving with the hands. We need him to hold the object, then release the object, catch it with the other hand, and then ideally, in the case of the example that I was given, throw it back to the original hand. If we have time, we'll try to do that. If not, it's the same process. So, how do we approach something like this? Well, the first thing we need to ask ourselves is what's going to lead here? This is going to be a very important question. Is it the hand that is leading the object? So in this case, I'm animating the hand, the object will follow along, then I throw it, and then it catches into the other hand, and that other hand now has to lead the object. Or is it the object that's leading? I'm animating the lightsaber, going through the air, moving around, and the hands are just locked onto the lightsaber. Both of these are correct, depending on the situation that you're animating. And they have a totally different workflow on how we would approach getting this switch to work. So the first method I'm going to do is, let's say we need to have the hands leading the objects. So the hands are animated and we need the object to follow along. So how do we get this to follow? Well, the basic thing is that we're going to need to use constraints. We need to constrain this object to the hand and have it follow along. The problem with that, if I just do a straight constraint, so I'm going to take his wrist or his hand control here. If you're constraining to a hand, it's always best to constrain it to an arm control or a joint in the wrist versus the FK or IK controls. The reason for this is if I constrain this lightsaber to the FK control here and then switch to an IK hand, it's not going to follow along. It's stuck to the FK. By constraining it to the arm control on this rig, well, let's actually just show it. So FK control. Make sure I can actually select it for some reason. What's going on? Interesting. Can't select my FK control. There we go. Weird. For some reason it wouldn't let me select it. So FK control and then the lightsaber. And I'm just going to go to constrain, parent, and make sure maintain offset is turned on. I'll add that. We will see that, haha, it follows. Perfect. But if I switch the hand to IK now, you can see it no longer follows. It's stuck back there. This is because the FK control still exists. It's just being switched and they don't line up. So we don't want to do that. Instead, we would want to, like I said, constrain it to an arm control. So we'll take the arm control here. I'll just do a constraint, parent, and now it follows along. If we switch to FK or IK, it still holds on regardless. So now I can do FK, IK switches. Aha, no problem. So something to keep in mind. Now, with that said, we constrain it here and we need to have it let go. Well, there's a few different ways we can do this. We have the blend parent. This will turn the constraint on and off globally, but is not going to give us the power to switch constraints. This is a global on-off switch. Whatever happens, this will just turn constraints on or off, nothing else. Instead, we will need to have a more complex setup here. So let's actually, before we just jump right in and do the Maya stuff here, I want to show the way I typically approach doing a constraint like this. If you are new to it, or if you are trying to plan out something that's a little bit more interesting. And let's see, what is the interest of switching between IK, FK? It's just the way it's animated. FK gives you more natural arcs and motions if the hand is free. IK will let you place the hand on something and then keep it still. So if I have to have him doing a swing and then like maybe he hits the lightsaber down onto the ground and then holds it there, or maybe stabs it into a door and he's trying to like melt through the door, episode 1 style. If I have the hands in FK as the lightsaber's through the door, every little motion I make in the body is going to start sliding that lightsaber through the door, and he's just going to be slicing right through it. I could then instead switch to IK and it'll just lock it in place, and I can do this with the body and the hands will stay in place. So it really just depends. Sometimes it's easier to animate a section in FK, other times easier to do it in IK. So it's nice to be able to do that switch. So when I am, let's see, what if multiple characters pass on the same object? This workflow will work regardless of characters, regardless, like I could pass this on like a hot potato to 3 different characters. One tosses it, then the other one goes, tosses it, the other one catches it and tosses it. This workflow will work regardless of who's holding it or what's holding it. In this case, we've got left hand, right hand, but it really doesn't matter. And also Animator Island, hello! For anyone who doesn't know, Animator Island has a really cool blog, YouTube channel. Check them out. They are really, really cool. They've got some awesome stuff. Check their stuff out. And I think I have a link. Yeah, so this is a link to one of my favorite posts from them. But there you can find all their stuff. So we've got a constraint. Oh, my pleasure. You guys deserve it. So we've got a system here. We've got left hand, right hand, and we've got the lightsaber in the middle. Now, in this case, we are going to be doing the hands leading method. So the hand is the thing that's animated, the lightsaber is following along. Now, as I'm trying to plan this out, the big thing that I'm trying to think of is how can I make this work in a lot of different situations? And this is where like practicing with constraints is going to be very helpful. The big thing that I don't want to do when I'm constraining is take the lightsaber in this case and just constrain it directly to the hand control. In this case, I drew out the wrist, but just imagine it's the hand control there. So I could constrain it directly, but there's a few different problems with that. The first is that, and probably the biggest, is that I can't animate a constrained object. If I just take this this lightsaber and constrain it directly on this, I can no longer animate this. It is just locked to that hand, done. So if I want the character to do like some sort of lightsaber twirl where he's just spinning it and it's still following the hand, not gonna happen. It is literally like I took super glue, put it in the hand, and it's just stuck there. No. So instead, what we want to do is add a buffer, a way for us to still be able to animate this lightsaber even though it is constrained. Now, there's a lot of different ways to do this, and there's a lot of more complex ways that'll give you even more control than what I'm going to show here, but this is going to be the basic level. Like this is the simplest way you can do this. The first one is to create a locator. So a locator in Maya is just this simple little object, and we can use this as a buffer to give us extra control. And what we're going to end up doing is we're going to constrain the lightsaber to the locator. That's going to lock it in place. But then we're going to take the locator and parent it, just regular parenting, to the wrist. Parenting also allows us to have objects follow along, but they stay animatable. I can animate a child, so in this case the locator would become a child, and I can keep animating this without any issues. Yay. Now, why don't we just use parenting in the first place? Well, two reasons. One, parenting cannot be turned on and off, whereas constraining can. Parenting isn't just like real life. If you're a parent, you can't just go, kids, no, I don't have them today. I'm a bachelor again. Yay! And then I'll be a parent tomorrow. No, that just makes you a bad parent. You're still a parent, just a bad one. So the parenting is not going to give us that control to let go of the lightsaber. It's going to be able to be animated, but it's going to be stuck to that hand. The other thing is that we cannot parent a rig. This lightsaber is not just a simple prop. It is a rig. It's got controls. It's got all of this extra stuff. Parenting is a hierarchy-based system. It basically puts one object into another, which means that if we were to try to do this with a rig, it would tear that rig apart in order to try and make it work. Most of the times it'll just fail and just come up with an error. But if it does succeed, you've broken your rig, gotta re-rig it, or things are gonna be bad. So we never want to use it with rigging. With a locator is just a little placeholder. We can use that no problem. So this is going to be the basic setup. We're going to constrain the lightsaber to the locator, parent the locator to the hand. The locator will then act as a way to animate the object. Now, on the other hand, we're going to do the same thing. Create another locator and just kind of do it the other way. So parent and then constraint. This is the nice thing about constraints, is you can actually have multiple constraints on one object. So this lightsaber will be constrained to locator number 1 and locator number 2. And this is going to be the magic that lets us switch, is the fact that we can deal with multiple constraints and change the values on how they are controlled. So this is going to be the basic setup. So very simple. If you wanted to go even deeper than this, there's a lot of different ways we could do this, but this is like base level, the same, what we want to use. Now, there's a good question here. What's the advantage of a locator over a group? Honestly, there's no real advantage. It's really personal preference. The locator here could be a group, it could be a null object, it could be a polygon cube, it could be a polygon sphere, it could be a NURBS object. Honestly, as long as it's a simple something, not a big, like, you don't want to use a prop, or sorry, a complex rig, but as long as it's something in between, it'll work exactly the same. The reason I like to use locators is, one, they're very easy to spot in comparison to the rig controls. So I can very easily spot which ones are the thing controlling the constraints versus what are the controls on the rigs or the props. The reason I prefer locators over groups or null objects is that you can see them. The problem with a group or a null object, so for example, if you have nothing selected and hit Control G, that's the command to group something, you will create a null object. A null object is an empty group. That's all it is. Well, it is still an object in space. Even though technically it's invisible, a group or a null object is considered an object still. It can be moved around, so I can translate it, all of this stuff. It would work exactly the same. The only negative to me, and this is why I don't use it, is you cannot see it. And you cannot select it in the viewport. So if I now have to animate this and adjust my position, the only way I can do this is to constantly have my outliner open and then select it from here. I don't like this. It's just annoying to me to always have to rely on the outliner just to select one control. Especially if I just want to like move it a few pixels to like improve the arc. It's a pain. But really, honestly, it's whatever you prefer. I know people who exclusively use groups. That's what they like. That's the way they want to do it. They don't like cluttering up the viewport. Great. If that works for you, there's nothing wrong with it. Absolutely nothing. It is down to personal preference. So let's actually set this up here. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to create a locator. So create a locator and name the locator. So this is the first thing. We're going to be dealing with multiple constraints. We want to have good naming structure here. Otherwise, we're going to have locator 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just a nightmare. So this is going to be the locator for the right hand. So I'm just going to call this right hand locator. Like that. Now, usually when I just my naming convention, I'll put underscore locator just so it stands out a little bit more. So this is my right hand locator. I'll scale it up a little bit. And you can see, there it is. And this is, again, why I like it over a null object, is I can select it. Oh, I need to adjust it. Click, select. I don't have to go into my outliner. Only reason, like group null object locator, only reason is because I can see it here. So the first thing I need to do is I could just set it up. I could parent, constraint, all of that. But ideally, this locator should be placed where I can control the lightsaber and line it up with the lightsaber. Keep in mind, this locator is going to be the thing that's actually moving the lightsaber. So if I don't put this in the correct spot, what I'm going to end up getting is, for example, let's just show this here. I'm going to constrain the lightsaber to the locator. When you're constraining, it's the object that leads and then the object that follows. That's the order you have to select them in. So constrain, parent, always double check your options. In this case, I want to maintain offset turned on. That keeps the relationship between the two there. Perfect. So now we can move the locator and, oh, not working. Why? Did I not? There we go. I just didn't hit it. There we go. So haha, it follows along. Great. But the locator is now acting as the main control for this lightsaber. And look at the offset here, which means that when I rotate it, I'm getting this. Whee! That's going to be fun. I can already start hating my animation because it's going to be a nightmare to work with. No, we don't want that. If there's this huge offset, we're going to be fighting our animation for the rest of the time we're animating it. So the first thing I need to do is move this locator to line up with the lightsaber. Now you could do this manually, but the quick and easy way to do this is we can use the power of constraints. So temporarily, I'm going to make a constraint, but in the opposite direction. I'm going to take my lightsaber and constrain the locator to it. So I'm going to select the lightsaber, select the locator, turn off maintain offset here, and hit apply. You can see that the locator snaps to meet up with the lightsaber. Everything is now oriented correctly. Perfect. But we've done it in the opposite direction. So now, in order to get this to work, I just need to delete my constraint. You can just find it right under the locator there. Hit delete. Now they're free, separate again. And I'm going to do it in the correct order this time. So locator, then lightsaber. And just hit apply. Now the locator leads, and it is perfectly lined up, perfectly oriented. Everything works correctly. Okay. So we've got that. Yay! We're on our good path here. Now, to get it to follow the hand, all we need to do is take our locator and parent it to the arm control. This is going to be the simplest way to do this. So, take the child, then the parent. The child is the object that follows. Parent is the object that leads. So, locator, then the arm control. And I'll just hit P on the keyboard to parent. And that puts the locator into the hierarchy of this arm control. And this is another reason why I like locators. You don't see it anymore here. That's because if we look here, it is now buried into the hierarchy of the arm control. I do not want to have to search through this to find my group or null object. So being able to select this in the viewport, much easier. Yes, so that's a good point, Jerome. Modify match transformation is also helpful. So if you want to snap things the correct way, you go here, modify, match transformations, match all transformations, or you could do the translations, rotations, all of that. Now, there is one problem with that. And that is that the match transformations will match values and not specifically orientation sometimes. Unless this has changed recently. But in older versions of Maya, basically what would happen, and this is why I don't use it, is you can have an object. Let's actually kind of show this here. I'm going to create 2 polygon cubes. So we've got 2 polygon cubes, and their values are both at 0 here. So 0, 0, 0, all of this. And then the other one, 0, 0, 0. Now, if I group one of these cubes and then move the group, whoop, the group has moved. We can see its values have changed. The original cube here is still at 0, 0, 0. The new cube is still at 0, 0, 0. The values are the same, but they're in different positions. Why? Because of the group. The group is controlling the cube and it is changing its global orientation. The object itself still thinks that it hasn't moved. It's kind of like if you're sitting in a car and the car is driving. Technically, yes, you are moving, but you are not walking. You are not moving around in your chair. You're just sitting there, staying still. The car around you is moving. So this can cause some issues sometimes, at least with older versions. Maybe they've changed that. Actually, let's give it a try. Let's just see. So modify, I forget the order that I have to do this. So let's try this. I think probably first, second. Okay. Actually, it looks like it's, yes. Okay. Thank you, Jerome. It's updated. It actually works. Yay. Okay, I'm going to be using this in the future. Yay. See, this is why I like streaming. You learn things. I learn things. Woohoo. So this is the quick way now. So either way, the result's the same, but the proper way is going to be to go to modify match transformations. Okay. So with all of that, we've got our locator following the arm. And the lightsaber is constrained to the locator, which means that we now have this. Haha! It follows along, but it doesn't let go. So we have that. So let's first off go on how we're going to let go of this object. There's a few different ways we can do this. The main way, so if I select the lightsaber here, the main way is going to be the blend parent. So if you have an object that's constrained and then you set a key on it, which I do have a key on this, you will get a blend attribute. This turns the constraints on and off globally, like we said at the beginning. So if I turn that off, it doesn't follow. If I turn it on, it follows. Great. Now, if I was just having the having him toss the lightsaber and then catch it in the same hand, this would work fantastically. I wouldn't need to do anything else. The problem with this is that it's not going to control the positioning properly. So for example, if I turn this off here and then turn it on over here, you can see it snaps back to the original hand. It's going to want to do that. Now there's ways we can avoid that, but honestly, even when we're trying to switch hands, that method's not going to be super helpful. And it really comes down to personal preference, but it's kind of more of a pain, at least to me, most of the time. So this doesn't really work anymore for what we need it to do. So instead, because we are switching hands, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to animate the weight of the locator down here. And the weight is what's really going to make this function for us. So right here, you can see the name. This is why it's important to name your locators. We can see right hand locator. That's the one we created here. And then we can see W0. So the W stands for weight. That's the percentage, the strength of the constraint. So if it's set to 1, that's 100%, it's on. 0, it's off. And then the 0 is just the number of constraints you have on this. It starts at 0. So let's start working on this here. So I'm going to have the hand go back, and it's going to let go on frame 10. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to right click on frame 9, right click on here, key selected, go to frame 10, turn that off, and you'll see the position resets. That's not a big problem because if he's throwing it, it's actually going to be moving forward. Now, you'll notice that I can't move it. It keeps snapping back. Why? I turned the constraint off. What's going on? The blend parent is still on. So the blend parent is still causing this object to want to be constrained here. Well, actually, sorry. No. Wait. What's going on? Let me double check here. Boop, boop. Okay, that's good. Let me just double check. Yeah, so I was right. So that blend parent is causing us to still have some issues. So let's animate that as well. Frame 9, that's going to be on. Let's key that. Frame 10 is going to be off. There we go. So now it goes through. We can animate the lightsaber. It's going to be right around here, starting to fly through the air. So we get that. I can try to position it exactly how I want. So we've got that. It gets thrown. Now what I'm going to do is find the moment that the other hand has to catch the lightsaber. So that's going to be right here. On frame 36, the lightsaber should drop into his hand and we should start closing around the hand there. So as the lightsaber goes through the air, we can come through. Let's move it into place here and just position it super roughly. Now, ideally, you should also kind of have it like figure out the path, the arc through the air. For the sake of speed, I'm gonna kind of speed this up here. So it lands in the hand right here, and haha, wee, boop, and then lands there. So let's actually, just for the sake of it, clean this up just a bit. So goes through, and then whoop. This is gonna look so terrible, but oh well, that's half the fun. Let's see. I can at least quickly try to get a bouncing ball feel for this. My credit as an animator is on the line here if I don't get at least the bouncing ball in here. So you have to key the blend parent and the locator weight each time. Seems redundant. It shouldn't, but for some reason on mine it is. Usually you should only have to animate the weight. I'm not sure why I'm having to animate the blend parent, honestly. The weight should just control it. But if for some reason you're running into the same issue, just turn off the just turn off both of them. And then this should come in here. It could be because I reset my preferences recently and things got a little funky. Okay. And then translate X. Something like that. Okay. So now we get wee. Boom. There we go. It looks terrible, but oh well. way too much time there. So at this point, we've got that, toss, catch. But now, as we turn this on, always lose my nice setup. Yeah, it's a pain when you reset your preferences and lose all of the nice setups you have. So it comes in and we get that landing right here. But at this point, we need to have it follow this hand from frame 37 in my case. So to get this to work, if I was to just turn on the constraint again, oop, great. It goes all the way back over there. That's not what I want. So what I need to do first, while this is still not constrained, while it's in this position, I need to set up my second constraint. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a new locator. So create locator right there. And I'm going to call this left hand locator. And then once again, let's match it to the lightsaber. And I'm going to do this the smart way this time. So the lightsaber, then the locator, go to modify, match transforms, match all. And that was the wrong direction. Locator, then that, there we go. And actually that's scaled it down as well. So let's scale it back up. There we go. Yeah, there is the enable rest position that will work as well. The main issue is that the constraint is still active. Even if it's staying in place, that's not what we want. We want the constraint to be off completely while it's going through the air. There should be no constraint information. The enable rest position would technically fix it. But in this case, I want it off. Which normally that one thing here, just having it off is off. It'll jump back, yes, but it shouldn't follow. But either way, it doesn't make a huge difference. So we now go through here. The lightsaber lands. Let's set up our system here. So the locator is going to follow the arm control. So select the locator, arm control, hit P on the keyboard to parent them. Let's double check that. Yep, it follows along. Now the lightsaber is going to follow the locator. So I'm going to select the locator now, the object that leads, then the lightsaber, the object that follows, and we'll create our constraint. We'll hit add. And right here, we get our second constraint right there. You see the right hand locator, left hand locator. And with this is what's going to allow us to create that switch. So let's actually see if this is going to work here. It comes through, lands. Let's key our blend parent. Key selected here. Frame 37, it should be on. And haha, it hasn't snapped back. And as it goes through, there we go. It follows along. Now, there is one problem. Let's go back to the beginning of the shot. Whee! That's not right. The lightsaber is in the middle of his face. The reason for this is that at this point, both weights of both constraints are turned on, which means that the object is trying to fight between both hands. It's being placed halfway between both areas that we constrained. All we need to do is make sure that we animate the weight here. So here, the weight should be off because it's in the air, it's not doing anything. Then it lands in his hand, it should be on. And just doing that, toss, catch, done. Now, if we wanted to switch it back or, well, let's do this. Let's switch it back to his other hand. We would just do the same thing. We would have him toss the lightsaber, turn off the weight, then it goes through the air, lands in his other hand. We turn back on the weight over here. So right there, I can switch it from one hand to the next just like that. So I can have him juggle this object back and forth just by animating those, and the blend parent turning that on and off in between so that it's totally free. It is not constrained at all. That's it. Now, if I needed him to toss it to another person, it's the same thing. You would create another constraint, and the other person would then come up in here. You'd have other person locator with their weight, and you'd turn that on. So you could have this lightsaber, this object, get just thrown from one person to a next, to a next, to next. And you just have this kind of succession of locators or weights that you just turn the weights on and off. And there you go. So that's pretty much it. Now, there is one very important thing to keep in mind when you are dealing with this kind of stuff. And that is that these attributes do not get listed with all of your other attributes in your timeline or in most things. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say I needed to retime my animation. So I'm just going to click and drag, and I want this whole lightsaber toss to be much faster. I don't want it to take so much time. So I'm going to take all my keys and move them back. Take my keys in the middle here. There we go. Now it's a faster toss. Yay. And actually, did it work? Did Maya finally update it? Yes. Let me double check this, because if this is new, because this didn't even happen, I don't think, in Maya 2019. Okay, let me try something here. Nope. Dang it. Okay. Actually, did it? No. So see here how the weight doesn't get moved? Yeah. Okay. I had hope for a little bit, and then it was dashed. Okay, let's do this in a different way, just to show this. So I'm going to select all this, retime. There we go. That should show it. Okay. Yeah, okay. There you go. So this is what would normally happen. I don't know why it worked. No. It was a freak accident of goodness for once, and of course doesn't replicate. Oh, I know why. I retimed it in the graph editor. That's why. If you retime it in the graph editor, it'll work. If you retime it in the timeline, this is what you get. Yeah, that's correct. So I grab, and then it doesn't move, and then you can see it snaps back. This is the one negative when you are using constraints and animating the weight of them, is that these keys here do not show up in the timeline. So, for example, if I take this here and retime this, you'll notice that my new keys, this is for the blend parent, is on 46, 47. But if I select the weight right here, you can see in the graph editor, it's still back there. And actually, what is going on? There you go. So see how they're still back there? They haven't lined up with my new retiming. This can be very annoying. If you're trying to retime your constraints and everything else, having it sometimes follow, other times not, can be nightmarish. And the big thing is that these are not technically part of the control that we're selecting. When I select this, I'm selecting the global control of the lightsaber. These attributes are not part of the global control. They are part of the constraint, which means that they're not going to be selected by default when I want to retime something. So What does that mean? Well, it just means that whenever you have to retime something, you need to make sure to select your constraints as well to double check that they will move with the rest of your animation. This is kind of a pain by default. And it's not something like I like to do, because normally you have to kind of click in here and then you can move those keys, and it's just, you're always having to do that for every single constraint. But there is a quicker way. The way I like to do it is that constraints don't have to, well, let me put it this way. Constraints can be organized. So right now, your constraint, when you constrain an object, it creates a little node in your outliner. So if I select this here, for example, and find the object, there's my constraint right there. This constraint does not have to stay within the object. If I wanted to, I can reorganize this and put this anywhere. It's just a little bit of code that's connecting them anyway. So I can take this and I can just drag it out in my outliner and bring it like right here. And I'll add it into a group called constraints. So if I have like 20 constraints in my shot, I can put them all in here. And now when I need to retime stuff, I can just click and drag, and then also control click on this. And now everything will be retimed together. I'm selecting my constraint, making sure that it is active. There you go. So you could have literally 20 constraints in there and just, okay, make sure to select them all, done. So now that whole keying the weight becomes a non-issue. So I just do that, select that. Now I can retime this with confidence, knowing that everything will work. There we go. Done. And when you have like constraints on 5 different characters and all of this stuff, and having them all right in here, man, does that make your life a lot easier. And then I can just rename this. So for example, this is going to be my lightsaber constraints. And there you go. Now I can just move that. Good. So lightsaber constraints, retime that. If I could have like a foot constraint if he's like standing on a moving train or who knows what, or he has to be picked up by something. That makes your life a whole lot easier. This is the grouping method of constraining. I'm not sure what you mean by grouping. This is using locators to constrain it's the same thing, honestly. Grouping, locators, it's the same thing. You're adding a buffer. Where you group the item you want to constrain? No. I very rarely group the item that I want to constrain. Almost never, honestly. Mostly because grouping is hierarchy based. So if you're dealing with a prop like this, and I try to group the main control, I will break this rig. The main control is down here. Let's actually just try. Take this, Control G. Yeah, it doesn't do anything. It's going to come up with an error. So grouping, unless you're dealing with a very simple prop, you're not going to use it. And for me, I always approach my animation as if this was a complex prop. Even if I'm dealing with a simple sphere and nothing else, I constrain it the same way. This way it is going to work, and I'm just in the habit of doing a workflow that doesn't break anything. And I do have a locator for each hand. So each hand has a locator here, which I can use to animate the lightsaber. So if I want to add, for example, just a little bit of a slip right here as it comes down, let's see, set a key, and then up here, I could just have that kind of slip down in his hand. And I can just do that. And then maybe right here, have it start to come up, and then whew, there we go. So that's why you have that locator, is you retain the ability to animate the prop even though it's constrained. Now that's terrible animation, but aha. Just to check, you wouldn't have just clicked all controls and moved them in the graph editor. For the retiming. And Tommaso, hey, thank you so much for the sub. Aw, thank you so much. So just to check, you couldn't have just clicked on all the controls and moved them in the graph editor. yes and no. It really depends. If you're just animating the blend parent, click and drag, done, retime, you're all good. The moment you start animating the weights of your constraints, right here. Oh, wait, where's my weight? There it is. The moment you start animating that, that's when you start getting into trouble. So these, because they don't show up in the timeline when you select most other objects, it can be a real pain to deal with. So this is why I like to group them separately like this. This way I can easily find them and make sure I have them selected like that. This way it makes sure they're selected and can be retimed along with anything else. Now, like we actually just experienced in this stream, sometimes it will follow along, but you have to use a very specific workflow for that to happen. And when I'm animating, I tend to forget about that until I've started retiming, and then everything's screwed up. So by having this here, it just makes sure that I keep it visible and I know the whole time. Let's see, let's say you turn off the constraints for both hands. It'll just be constrained to the world. It'll follow the world, but it won't be constrained. That's what the blend parent is doing. So the blend here, this blend attribute, what it is controlling is whether the object is following constraint information or key information. If I set this to 0, for example, right here, there is no constraints. The constraints, they're still there in the scene, but they are completely turned off. They are not having any effect on this object at all now. All it's following is the keyframe information that I put down. So I can key this and move it and do whatever I want. The moment I turn the blend back on, now it is constrained. Now it is going to follow the keyframe, or sorry, the constraints instead of the keyframes. So that blend parent is a global on-off switch for all the constraints on this object. Hopefully that makes sense. So, yeah. There we go. If you have time, can you show how you could have a rotation in the middle of the blade if it was extended while in the air? Let's see, could you show how you could have a rotation? Okay, so if we want to have a rotation here, so maybe have this spin in the air, the first thing I would do is, if we have the blade turned on, I would make sure the blade is on first. Simply because I don't want to animate this rotating without the blade and then find out that it cuts through his head by accident. That would be terrible. So we'll turn that on here. Now we've got this toss right there. Whoop, whoop. But maybe we want to make it a little bit more interesting. Maybe I had a little rotation in there. So what I'm going to do is go to my last frame right here just before he grabs it. And I'm just going to push the rotation. Let's see, which rotation do I want? Probably a little Z. And I'm just going to spin it like a full rotation here. Okay, that was X. So my rotate X goes through. We get that full rotation. At this point here, it just gets constrained, so it doesn't really matter. And from there, as long as I make sure that this frame and this frame still match up decently, so I can maybe do that, and then it lands into his hand, we now get that nice spin. And did I miss his head? Oh, no, I got the ear. Well, he didn't need that ear anyway. So we could do that. Aha. So I would just need to adjust the rotation now to work with that. But yeah, that's it. Now, if you're starting to get a lot of gimbal lock into this, this would start getting into a much more complex constraint setup. By that I mean change the rotation point to the middle, as if it were a typical sword or instance. Okay, so that's actually a good point. So let's say you throw this and then you want it to pivot from the middle of the blade. In this case, it's a lightsaber. The blade has no weight, so this would be correct. And this is the tricky thing with swords, is that a sword is never going to spin from the middle of the blade, a good sword. A good sword is going to pivot from the handle, from the just a point below the cross guard or at the cross guard. So let's actually, this is just kind of knowing a little bit of sword anatomy. We'll go over this and then we'll kind of show the thing here. So when you have a sword, let's just pick a sword here. You have the blade of the sword, you have the cross guard right there. You have the handle, the hilt, and then you have the pommel stone. The pommel stone, you'll notice it on almost all swords. You've got this big pommel right there. This is not just a hand guard so that the sword doesn't slip out of your hand. So right here, like, that's not the point of that. The point of this is to rebalance the sword. That is a weight. It is just a big heavy weight, like a lead weight sometimes, that changes the balance point of the sword. And the idea is to bring the balance point so that the sword, which is very long, is no longer balanced in the middle of the blade, but is balanced right around here. That's why swords are so easy to handle, and you can just kind of twist them around very well, because the weight is right here. If the weight was up here, trying to handle the sword or just holding it out like at arm's length would be nightmarish. Anyone would just like be dead tired after 2 or 3 swings. You would have a lot more strength in the swing, something like a hammer, but it wouldn't be a cutting instrument, it would be a bashing instrument. So, just something to keep in mind when you are animating a sword and you want it to fly through the air, it will rotate from the cross guard or somewhere around there, maybe just a little bit in front of the cross guard, but not in the middle of the blade. But, sake of argument, what if we do need to have it spin from the middle of the blade or some other point other than the handle? That happens all the time. How do we do that? Well, this is where your prop should ideally be made for it. So here, as this goes through the air, I've done a few demos on how to set this up for your own props, but you need to have an offset control. So this offset control here is what's going to allow us to change the pivot point of the lightsaber. So this is our main control. This is what's going to animate the whole thing moving. But I can take this offset here and move it down, and let's say we want to pivot from this point, or maybe like an actual sword, maybe from right around here, right above the cross guard. Now it pivots from there. So when I'm animating it, basically what I need to do is key this offset control. While it's in the hand, it's going to be right here, so it's pivoting from the correct spot. The moment it gets thrown, whoop, we'll change the pivot point and then just move this up higher to match. So visually, we're going to see no difference. But now the pivot point is up higher. Now, same thing when it goes through the air. Let's go down to when he catches it. Oh, that's going to hurt. I would want to make sure that I set a key here, so that have that pivot point changed, and then reset it back to be there. And on this pose, I'll just slide this forward so that it matches. Oh, a little too far forward. Right around there. Right there. So I've changed the pivot point with just that one control. And now it's spinning from that new point there. There we go. So you need that offset control. That's what's going to allow you to do that. And this is what's going to make it, for example, let's say you have a hammer, and a hammer is going to be totally the opposite. You got a big weight and you're going to toss it. It pivots from the hand, is held in the hand, but then when you toss it, it has to swing from the end of the hammer. Otherwise, it's going to look weird. So let's say this was a huge hammer. We are going to do the same thing. It's just going to be more extreme. So I'm going to take this offset here. Whoop, right to the tip, right around there. Make sure to then take my main control, move it up so that we reconnect it back to where it was. So whoop, you don't see a difference. At the end here, take the offset. Let's match the key. And then just whoop, right there. So now he tosses it and whee! It looks a little weird because we would have to change all of our arcs at this point, but it's pivoting from the end. So at this point, I just need to make sure that like as it goes out here, it keeps moving forward. So we get more of that weight of the end of the thing going forward. But it's really the same thing. At this point, it's just clean. Yeah, right there. It's that arc is ruining everything. So, whee! And then it's going a little too far out this way, but if this was a hammer, that would actually make sense because the handle would swing back. Yeah, at least we have the ear now. I would probably also change the arc so it catches it a little differently too. So this is where reference would come in. You'd want to look at a hammer throw versus a sword throw. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Now, if you're interested in like creating that, it's actually very simple. So I'm just going to create a very simple setup here. Let's say you've got, we'll say this is our sword. We'll just do a polygon cylinder here. Okay. So you've got your sword. We'll call this sword. And to create this offset control, if you want to make your own prop, it's a simple matter of creating a NURBS circle. We'll call this one our root control. Or you could call it master control, whatever name you want. This is our main control. I'm going to duplicate it, make it a little smaller. This is going to be our offset control. Always name your things. Offset control. And then we just need to make a very simple hierarchy. Now, the way I like to do this is I do not like to just parent a prop to a control here. So we could do it. I could take the sword here, parent it to this control, take this control, parent it to the root. So now if we move the root, everything moves. If we take the offset control, we can create that offset and this is it. Haha. There we go. We have that adjustable pivot point. If I need it to be up there, done. That's really it. But what I don't like is, notice how I select the control, but the object, the prop is highlighted. I hate that. Personally, when I select a control, for example, the control of the foot, I don't want to see the foot highlighted. I would want to be able to pose it out and not see all of these wireframes and things like that. That annoys me when I'm animating. So I do not parent the prop to the control like this. Instead, I constrain it. So let's break this hierarchy here. So we've got the root control. Okay, there we go. And then we've got our sword right here. So instead, I will take the offset control and I would constrain the sword to follow it. So you take the object that leads, object that follows, and then we'll go to constrain, parent. There we go. And then what I do is I just group all of this together. So the sword and the root control, group all of that, and we'll call this sword group. This just keeps everything organized, so my prop is like contained, just like you have here, the lightsaber, the rig. I have my sword group. I'm not just having a bunch of different controls randomly in my outliner. But with this, when I now select my controls, the prop isn't selected. It still follows along just like before. So we can do all of this, and we still get our ability to offset things. But now we only select the controls. So this is the typical way I will do something like that. Now, if you have a more complex prop, let's actually delete this. So we're going to do a more complex prop. Let's say we have a cross guard here. Whoop. Isn't it fancy? I'm so proud. So we've got this. There's our cross guard, and let's add a blade. And the blade is just going to be flat. And there we go. Make it a little longer. So there we go. Cutting right through his thigh. So let's say we have this. How would we set this up? I could constrain every single one of these pieces, but that gets to be a pain to have all of those constraints. Instead, I'll just group all of these. I'll just call this sword geo. So this is all my geometry in one group right there. And then I would constrain the group to the offset control. So offset control, group, and then go to constrain parent, and we get the same thing. So now I can move this whole sword, animate it. If I need it to pivot from a different point, I can take my offset, move it down. Now pivots from there. There you go. So this makes it so that if you have to animate the character swinging, maybe they're holding it right at the cross guard, you could do that. It swings through, but maybe at some point they let the sword slip and they're just holding it by the pommel stone as they are swinging the sword. All I would have to do is animate this going through there, like that, and you would have the sword slip through the person's hand and then rotate from here. Done. And this can be applied for all sorts of different things. So maybe I'm animating Magneto, and like he's going to take this sword and he's going to just fling it and like spin it around him to like stab at someone. Well, it doesn't just have, these offsets don't have to just go along the length of the sword. So let's say I want to kind of have it a spinning blade just going around this character. I could take this offset and let's take I want this to be our central point. I'll put this kind of at the base of the character here. And then I'm going to take this offset control and just move it off to the side. Whoop, like that. Now, I can animate this sword spinning around him and make like a few of them and make this wall of swords that is just like spinning in a sphere around him with literally one control. Just whoop, done. Need to add another sword. I'll just duplicate the group. Let's kind of rotate that up here. And now I can have another sword that's spinning around this way. Done. So you can get really creative with your animations just with that one offset control. And if you're really creative, you can start adding multiple offset controls, which just blows the possibilities out of all. Yeah, Final Fantasy 15. Like, you have some magician, some magic user who can summon swords and control them and float them around them. It's not that hard to animate. How do you bring up the shortcuts menu for getting to constraints? This is the hotbox in Maya. Just hold down the space bar and that'll bring up every menu in Maya. If you actually look at my interface has almost nothing in it. I don't see any file edit at the top. I don't see any shelf. I don't see anything. This is my typical animation workflow interface because I like to see the animation. I don't like to see a bunch of menus that I don't end up using. So instead I can just hold down the space bar and I have access to all of these menus. File, edit, create, all of that. Your animation menu is right here. So key, playback, visualize, constraints right there. Your modeling menu right here. Everything you can access in Maya is available right here, which is fantastic. And then you have the zones. So left zone here, you can turn on different masks, On the right, on the bottom here, you can open up all your windows. So if I need the outliner, boop, open it up right there. You can very quickly just switch your different views like that. On the right side, you can turn on and off different UI elements. And at the top, you can switch your layouts. So if I want just a single perspective view, right there. If I want my perspective and graph editor, right there. Maybe my hypershade, right here. And Creative Steve, thank you so much for the sub. Jeez, 10 months. 10 months of friendship, yes. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That's awesome. Thank you. So yeah, the Hotbox is your friend, and it really speeds up your workflow. Once you realize that everything's in there and that you have access to all of it, if you remember where things are, so for example, if I need to go to a constraint menu, boop, right there. I don't have to go up and find it here or switch from my modeling set to my animation menu set. None of that. It's just doop, constraint. Oh, I need to create an editable motion trail. Well, doop, visualize, create editable motion trail. It's right here. Because I use a tablet, it's literally like just a little flick of the wrist, and I have access to every menu right here. So yeah, that's how I use it. So with that, I think that basically covers the demo. So hopefully that made sense. Hopefully that goes over how I would approach animating this object constrained to the hands. Now there is another way we can do this, and that is what happens if the let me actually just clean this up here. What happens if instead of the hands controlling the object, the lightsaber is the one controlling the object? So we are animating the lightsaber going through the scene, but the hands are just constrained to it. Well, it's basically the same thing, except we don't have to worry about animating the weights of the constraints. Instead, we would have a separate constraint on one hand, constraint to the lightsaber. You'd turn off the blend parent. You'd have another constraint over here. On the other hand, turn on the blend parent. So we would basically have this, but you would still have your locators. And in this case, the hands are following. So you would have the hand constrained to a locator, and then the locator parented to the lightsaber. This locator will now allow us to move the hand while it is on the lightsaber, making it easier to pivot around and just kind of adjust things while the hand is holding it. Now, because the locator is parented to the lightsaber, we only need the one. So you would then have a constraint going here, whoop, onto there. So both of these would be constrained. And then a separate constraint right here to the locator, and you would just turn off each individual. Since there's two separate constraints here and they're on two separate objects, we would just animate the blend parent, and then that's it. So much simpler in that sense. So yeah, that's pretty much it. This one, we have two constraints, but because they are both going to this object here, this is the object that's constrained, we need to adjust the weights. Whereas here, the objects that are constrained are this and this. So two separate constraints. This is why the blend parent method works. So hopefully that makes sense.